On our Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, there are just 25 games remaining in this Toronto Raptors season. Are they inching towards having a successful year? We'll get into that and so much more as Katie Heindl is back from San Francisco with lots of fresh NBA gossip. We'll get to that coming up in just one sec.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, February the 25th. And I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can also find the show on Instagram, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join. Great place to come hang out, talk ball among friends. Love our little listener community over there. The book club chat just popping off. Didn't know there were so many bookworms in there. There's like 4. As one of our users says, I didn't know this was a place where people really read books. Turns out, at least there's some. So yeah, come hang out. It's a great place. Would love to see you there in the Discord. One of the least toxic places online these days. Of course, you can go and subscribe for free to the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter as well. QR code on the screen. Link in the description of the podcast. You can go and subscribe for the low, low price of On the House. You get me 5 days a week talking about your beloved local basketball team. You also get today's guest 4 times a week with her League at Large story. She's back from San Francisco. She was at All-Star. She was, eating at fruit markets and walking around and taking pictures of vistas. It was lovely. And she's back here to, do a little debrief from All-Star, get some of the scuttlebutt from around the league regarding the Raptors, and talk about the final 25 games ahead here for the Raptors as they embark upon the easiest remaining schedule in basketball and have, all kinds of interesting storylines going on. Young guys making moves, Immanuel Quickley finding form, RJ Barrett looking darn good, Scottie Barnes, kind of progressing as this incredible defensive player, lots of on-court storylines, off-court stuff to figure as well. We're just going to do a little vibe check, 10,000-foot view of where things sit with Katie Heindl, the my boss of the Locked On NBA newsletter family kingdom. I don't know what we're calling. Are you calling yourself a king here, Katie?
No.
That's just for someone else. Okay, cool. Katie, how the hell are you?
I'm doing well. I can't. That 25 game remaining number makes me feel a little bit strange. I gotta say.
It's flying by. I guess time flies when you're having fun, Katie, as they say. It's been kind of a fun Raptors season, even though they're not very good as far as 18-39 seasons go. This is top of the pops, having a blast. They're interesting. They're fun. Cool things are happening on the floor. Let's start just kind of 10,000-foot view here, Katie, as we talked about, you just got back from San Francisco. You talked to a lot of people down there about sort of what's going on. I'm sure you get asked about the Raptors a lot. And you kind of came armed to today's show with a little bit of hot goss from, the scuttlebutt around All-Star down in San Francisco. But for you, just like looking at where things are right now, Katie, 25 games to go. We'll talk about the lottery implications of every game they're going to play down the stretch. That's a big storyline off the court to keep tabs on. But do you feel like we are trending towards this season going down as like a clear success for the Raptors franchise, or do you have some reservations? Where are you feeling? Or how are you feeling? Where are you at?
No, I think that's a good question because I don't think it was necessarily clear. Like when you're in a development season, what are the benchmarks for that development, right?
Right.
And there were injuries, and people out in and out of the lineup again. So if one of the benchmarks is for everybody to stay healthy and to see some kind of metric returns in production, they didn't have that. And they didn't necessarily, for some people, I think it would have been to tank, and they're not having that. And they've got more wins, maybe now more wins than I thought they would under their belt. So
if they don't yet, they certainly will after they play the murderer's row of the Jazz and Wizards and Hornets they have to play down the stretch.
But I think you could probably break the season into 2 parts, and that will just clearly be pre and post trade deadline. I think it shows that as much as the front office at the beginning of the year told us, we're ready to be patient, we are going to grow the guys we have, I think we now see the front office got a little impatient, and that's fine. Masai talks all the time about winning, and I think from what I've heard, he got bored of not having a winning property on his hands, like a team
Sure.
that was capable of excelling um, in the next few seasons faster. So he wanted to accelerate that.
Mhm.
And I get that thinking too. So it was basically like a part one and part two. I think the part two has been much more successful and feels much more easy to root for because one, I think people love to get new players, right? People love like a new kind of dynamic on the team. And the Raptors did need it, I think. I think this also like I think raises the ceiling on what people should hope for. And
Totally.
just like how aspirational can we think of this team being next season and how competitive, I think they'll be much more competitive now. I know there's like people aren't necessarily actually I don't know. You would be the better judge of this. I'm hearing more from league side of things,
Right.
and that is nobody is sold on Brandon Ingram. But I think for Raptors fans, my sense is they're really ready to support this guy and get behind him. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of in that camp. Like he did really grow on me in New Orleans. I think there's something to be said for getting a good medical staff around him, a dedicated medical staff, I will say, that is not shared with another sports franchise, and a clear vision and a plan for him.
Mhm.
I think that could all be really beneficial. I will say in the NBA, it is one of these leagues where like so much of the discourse becomes that person can't just because we haven't seen that person do something before. When they then are asked to and they can, it's like a revelation.
Right.
But for the most
This
part,
incredibly talented
yeah.
basketball player tailored his game to fit into a
Like,
different style of
wow,
playing
why didn't we
basketball.
ever
Wow.
see that happen before? And it does happen time and time again. It frustrates me to no end. So I think
Sure.
for Ingram, he now has a lot of that on his side. But yeah, I think the latter half of the season certainly much more successful. Whether we would look at this as being a successful Raptors season in recent Raptors history, I think it becomes successful because it feels like such a relief that there's a plan again.
Yeah, and it feels like I've kind of used this terminology. It does feel like very ground floory this year, where it's like, hey,
Sure. Yeah.
everyone's in the elevator. Yeah, some guys are going to hop out at floors on the way up, but for the most part, a lot of these dudes are in it for the long haul, all the way to the however close they get to the top, which remains to be seen. But
Mhm.
yeah, I totally agree in the idea of this like being a tale of sort of two seasons within one. Although I think I'd probably make the split. The game where they got absolutely murdered by the Celtics on New Year's Eve, and then the next day, Immanuel Quickley comes back on New Year's Day. They win that game, and like from there, they've been just like a very normal, competent 500-ish basketball team where lots of interesting things have been happening. I think that first part of the season, like it's pretty clear, injuries played a massive role in what
Mhm.
happened there. Not having Immanuel Quickley, I mean, we're seeing right now with what Quickley's doing over the last little bit, like his 3-point shooting legitimately game changing for how this team plays basketball. And to not have that and to not have anyone on the team who could replicate what he does while he was out, like it makes a lot of sense. They were not very good for the first couple months. And
Mhm.
I think the last couple months here have really shown that I think, anyone who had optimism coming into the season that they could be kind of better than what they were projected to be, I think there was some validity to that. And, I also think too, I think this is an interesting thing to consider. And maybe Masai and Bobby make the Brandon Ingram trade no matter what. But I do think the way they played in January, where they had that little run, they won like 8 of 10. They looked really solid. They were playing against good teams and playing them well. They beat the Celtics. Hopefully they do that again tonight. That'd be fun. Always fun to beat the damn Celtics. But I think that stretch almost gave them license to make this trade for Ingram, where
Mhm.
it's like, hey, we know we're better than what the record says. This month has kind of been some proof of concept, even if it still hasn't been a full sort of example of all of these pieces we have working in concert with one another. That's more happened over the last few weeks here, arguably since the trade. But I think just seeing that little, like if they go, in January, they go 1-13. I don't think they make the Ingram trade because I think they probably realize, oh, we're further away than we thought.
Mhm.
Whereas you have that little run where you finally have your guys, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, maybe we can accelerate this thing and kind of hit the gas going into next year. Like, do you think the Ingram trade happens, I mean, we'll never know. Like, this is, maybe we get truth serum into Bobby and Masai one day. But like, do you think the Ingram trade happens if they don't have that spell of competent play in January?
So you're saying they traded for him because they looked a little bit better?
They looked like they had a more credible case to sell. Hey, Brandon Ingram's going to make us, like, help us be competitive next year. Whereas if they were, I don't know, 10-45, maybe
Right.
you can't quite make that claim.
I honestly would. I think where our competitive barometers are very different than the front offices.
Sure.
Like Darko is kind of here, and then Masai and Bobby are up here because I think they have won before and like brought a team to fruition and all the way there. So I think their impatience, yes, to your point, I do think if you don't have a good team that you're working with, what is the point of taking a big swing, especially on someone who you are not sure to begin with will stay, right?
Or fit.
Yeah. And I think probably that it's the latter half of they don't make that trade if they don't think the team is in a good enough place to entice somebody like Brandon Ingram, who, even though his quote stock is low across the NBA, whatever, you have to sell someone on that, on like your X amount of years, right? Especially like you want to extend them in Toronto, you want to get him to stay. Like, that isn't just bringing someone to Toronto in the ugliest month of the city, like the worst time to live in Toronto, which does count. Like, honestly, in terms of first impressions, like, this is where you're going to be living.
It's a good thing they got him signed before the snowstorm last week.
Like,
let's put it that way.
If you play in Toronto, like, yes, it's we love Toronto. We love to be here in the summertime, but like the season is in the winter. So I do think about that a lot. Anyway, all that aside, I think if the team wasn't in a more competent, competitive place as it was, then it gets much tougher to convince somebody like Brandon Ingram to want to stick around. So I think that they thought the team was still bad, and that's what prompted them to go out and take a big risk. But I think they thought it was good enough that they could convince Brandon Ingram to stay.
Right. And I think sell kind of, the fan base, I think a year ago, this type of trade might have been met with, what the hell are they doing? Which is like the national response to the trade still, it seems. But it does seem like most of the fan base has kind of gotten on board with the logic behind it and like the buy low element and all of that stuff.
But there's always a what the hell. I think if you have a trade that doesn't have a what the hell element, if you have a rare trade that everyone's like, this makes a lot of sense, it's probably not a great trade because it doesn't actually move the needle much for either team.
It's a great point.
Kind of like sliding doorsing people, right? And so, it's good to have a little shock and awe.
That's well put. We're going to come back into the side here, Katie. I want to talk about Darko Rajaković, who I think we're finally starting to get some tape and some book on what he's actually all about now that he's, had a team for more than like a week and a half at a time to work with and kind of grow with. We're going to get into Darko, maybe some of the sort of league-wide impressions of Darko you picked up talking to folks down in San Francisco and how we would grade his season so far. We'll do that coming up in just 1 second as we continue our vibe check. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get a 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Lots of ways you can go take advantage of this deal. Of course, maybe your little game day feast. You want to go get yourself some wings or pizza or burgers. We have some friends over to watch the game, whatever it might be. Maybe you finished up podcasting about a basketball team at a late hour and are a little peckish and you want to go order something. You can do that as well with Dash Pass. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And of course, tip your damn drivers. Back at it here with Katie Heindl of the Locked On NBA family of newsletters, our national editor, fearless leader, of course, basketball feelings, all SB Nation, all over the damn place. It's the best. We love Katie's work. We also love when Katie's on the podcast talk about Darko Rajakovic, who has been this sort of mystery man for like a year and a half, where it's like kind of got dealt an insane hand of cards. You know, first year he comes in, and it's all this, development's back on. And then the first day of the season, it's like, our best player? Yeah, we don't really want that guy around here. We're going to sort of have this sort of sword of Damocles hanging over the team for the first half of the year, just waiting to trade this guy. So deal with that, Darko. Have Dennis Schroeder run your offense. See how you like that. We'll figure it out. And then, after that, you have like the 1 month last year, February of last year, where the team kind of comes together with its new look around Scottie Barnes. They look pretty coherent. They're like a 500 team. Things are fun. And then Jakob Poeltl, Scottie Barnes get hurt. Rest of the season's a complete write-off with a whole lot of Jordan Nwora and Jonte Porter. You come into this year and you have injuries right out of the gate, and like nasty injuries. Immanuel Quickley picking up baseball injuries and falling on his ass in the first game of the season and missing 8 games and just like never getting in a rhythm until January. And even you missed some time even after coming back in January. It's been up and down for him. A very strange season for the Raptors point guard. You've had, the sort of the need to play a bunch of rookies in the first part of this season, which like just kind of out of necessity because Kelly Olynyk was out, Bruce Brown was out, Scottie missed some time, Poeltl missed some time. It was just like a really difficult situation to get any kind of feel for what the hell Darko is as a coach. Katie, do you feel like we're getting there when it comes to knowing what Darko's all about? And do you like what we're figuring out, if so?
It's funny that you call him a mystery man, because as you were saying that, I was like, he is, but he's kind of like, he tricked us. Like he seems like he's the most accessible mystery man. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm not hiding anything. Like, I'm very good. It's like he does still kind of keep things close to the chest.
He's so good at answering questions in a way that makes you feel good as someone who's asked him a question.
But then after you're
actually really say anything. Yeah.
After you're like, wait a second. Yeah.
He tricked me with his niceness, damn it.
Yeah, he
smiled at me.
He's a little tricky because he's very considerate and thoughtful, and I think quite smart. So how has he done? Yeah, I think he's done well. I think, to your point, is a bullseye one, that he finally, like he's showing us his strengths, and I think what the front office saw in wanting to bring him in when he has a consistent team. He did pretty well, like as well as could be expected with all the changes that he's had up until now. But I think now that the roster is taking shape, we've also seen his strengths. What I guess the gossip you're alluding to. So the gossip you're alluding to is I surprisingly was asked a lot about Darko, because this is the thing, I think, from a national perspective, if you're not paying attention to the team, which is also the sense I had at All-Star, you at least
not watch the Toronto Raptors. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you?
Yeah.
I get it.
No, I get it.
There's only so much time in the day. The world's hell.
They're a little bit off the radar this season.
Yeah.
Then you do know the coach, though. And you also are looking closely at that because of like the coaching reshuffling I think we saw mid this season was, somebody like Mike Brown getting ousted. And I think there's a lot of question marks surrounding a couple other coaches. So people like that kind of intrigue, right? Sure. So it was that people were surprised that I thought he was doing a good job, in the sense that, not that he's a bad coach, but that he doesn't necessarily have the like bite or the intensity of some of the other coaches. But to which my argument is, well, that's not really what the team needs right now. You don't. Totally. Can you imagine like a maniac behind the wheel of this team? Predominantly,
they had one of those.
Yeah, they did. They did. But like when you're trying to nurture the vibes back from extinction, like the brink of extinction. Figure out what the new identity of this team is. It completely changed. Everybody's really young. They're like, they want to win and compete, but like they don't really know who they are yet. So you got to sort that out. You've got to bring faith back from the fan base. Like you have a more like existential job, I think, somebody like Darko does, than a coach who's just going to be like, I'm going to drill these guys into exhaustion every night, because to what end also, right? Like
Totally.
you want a maniac when you have the pieces together for a maniac coach, and you want that coach to like push them into sort of the upper echelon of competition, but that would be useless for this team right now.
Right.
So to that end, I think he's doing a phenomenal job, and I don't really get the detractors, because I think a maniac coach, as you said, they've had them, and it wouldn't serve any purpose, basically.
Yeah, I think, and I do think that, there's an element too where just because he's like a nice guy publicly facing, and he's friendly and he's jovial and he, shakes everyone's hands and kisses babies, like it doesn't mean he's not holding guys to account behind the scenes. I just think he's someone who just like really doesn't want that stuff public, which I think is great, right? Like I don't think he's sitting back and like coddling all of these guys. I think there's like a pretty high standard they're looking for when you kind of read between the lines with the things they say and with the things he says. And just because he's not out there being like an Ime Udoka level psychopath on the sidelines doesn't mean that he's not like demanding a lot from his players. It can come in different forms. And frankly, like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a sap. Maybe I'm just a romantic. I like the idea of a nice guy being a successful coach. Doesn't seem to happen very often, but like I'm into that as like a thing, and I'm rooting for that. And it seems like what he brings to the table, especially in, it's a new version of the NBA. It's modern, like it's a different generation of players. Like I think there has to be some tailoring of your approach to the times a little bit. And I think Darko's done a pretty good job of kind of striking a balance of, not being too easy on guys. That might have been something he was easily accused of last year. I think last year was kind of this like fun, happy-go-lucky Mickey Mouse season where they're like, yeah, we won 3 games in a row. Let's have a pizza party. And like, I think he learned from that stuff. I think there's way more serious tone around the team this year. And I think the results on the floor kind of speak for it too. Like, he came into this season and said, we need to learn how to play defense. We are going to be drilling defense and like hammering it home all year long. And on the season, they're 24th in defense. But since the turn of the calendar to January 1st, they're 12th in defense and have looked like genuinely promising there. Scottie Barnes is looking like a one-man wrecking crew defensively. Like, that's a lot of Scottie Barnes, but that's surely also a lot of what's going on behind the scenes with the coaching staff as well and how they're deploying Scottie Barnes. And I think, yeah, like you can't, to me, there's very little to quibble with about this season from Darko, from the coaching staff, from how things have gone. And, again, it's been a really difficult set of cards with the injuries and the up and down. And it'll be an even more interesting thing once Brandon Ingram comes in and they have to sort of sort that out. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year, whenever that happens. And that's going to be a big test for him, maybe his biggest test yet, to kind of see how he can copacetically fit all these pieces in and have everyone feel like they're part of something and not feel like they're getting kind of squeezed out. But yeah, like I it's nice to have a guy who feels like he knows what he wants from the team, and it seems like they're getting it. And yeah, it's not perfect. And I mean, we can get into it. I think this is always such like a tough thing to pin down because we don't know how a coach is going to respond to like the gauntlet of the playoffs. And like, we don't know if they're the type of guy that they can get a team over the top until we actually see it, because like, it's just like an impossible thing to predict and forecast. But do you have it like any sort of, I know there's like this sort of feeling among Raptors fans. I think it's very similar to how Blue Jays fans felt about their old manager, Charlie Montoyo, where he was just like this great dude. Everyone loved him. But when the team was trying to be serious, they let him go. And hey, the team's been garbage since that happened. So I don't know. But yeah, like, do you have any sort of inkling one way or another about how he might fare when things get a little more serious? Like, I don't think there's any reason to doubt him. He's like smart tactically. Like, he knows what he's drawing up. He draws up good stuff. Like, to me, I feel like that's kind of more important than being like, just this like mean, militant, sort of like nasty psycho on the sidelines. Like, I don't think you need to be that to have success. I think that's kind of an outdated way of thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think what a lot of the discussion around coaching loses a lot of nuance and understanding that people like can be both. Like, they're your best coaches are going to be both. Those things are going to be pretty stern. I don't want to say militaristic, but like they're going to be quite focused, right?
Sure.
And dialed in when they need to be. And they're also going to have a great like relationship muscle that they know how to flex and is very well developed, I think, to gain the trust of their athletes. You want a coach who can do both of those things and who also understands when to toggle between them, which I think takes a lot more inherent skill. Just as a person, that's not necessarily a coaching instinct, right? It's interpersonal skills. And I think a lot of that gets lost when we think like, oh, we've got to jettison this coach because they're not, quote, serious. And we need to go get a maniac, which we've seen time and time again fails, right? Because you don't want just one thing. You don't want just a maniac all the time, right? But your best coach will be able to be both. So to that end, I think Darko, we've seen him be like maniac light, in defense of his players, which again, like that was one thing I forgot to mention before is like, I think that's another of his strong suits is his loyalty to the guys and the way that he'll publicly stand up for them, whether in game or at like post game and pressers, he's not afraid to have their back. And I think that goes a really long way with such a young team that's building. So I think you take all those things together and I can picture him being cool on the sidelines in a close playoff game. I can picture him freaking out, and getting like challenging the right call at the right time. But a lot of that stuff too is like, you got to get there to give someone a chance to see if they'll be able to do it. But from everything we've seen so far, there's no reason to doubt the ability that he could do that. You know what I mean? Like he strikes me as a very well-rounded person, and all like those are all the attributes I want in a good coach.
Totally. We're going to come back on the other side here, Katie, and wrap things up. Talk a little about Immanuel Quickley, who's coming into form here a little bit, and proving those who said he's bad because he was hurt very wrong. Turns out it's a dumb way to talk about basketball players. We're going to talk about Quickley, what we're looking for him to finish the season, and just some other sort of player development stuff we're watching down the stretch. That is kind of the key thing to watch over these final 25 games. We'll do that coming up in just 1 second. Wrapping it up here with Katie Heindl of Basketball Feelings and the Locked On family of NBA newsletters. Immanuel Quickley, Katie, he's been playing some pretty damn good ball lately. He's letting her rip, and he's cashing triples with reckless abandon. To me, he's probably the most interesting guy to watch down the stretch. I know all of the rookies are certainly going to get their run, but it's been this kind of like false start after false start thing with Quickley all season long. It's such a nice thing now to get to see him play like an actual sustained run of games. There's no minutes restriction anymore. They just seem to be kind of letting him loose. And I don't know, as someone who, I usually flock towards the guys who, are doubted and kind of said he's terrible or he's not a dude or whatever. Like I that's like always the type of guy I'm going to end up really, really liking. I'm a Karl Anthony Towns head at heart. There's a reason I loved Pascal Siakam to the bitter end, even though Raptors fans had strangely turned on the guy. Same for Fred VanVleet. VanVleet to a way more extreme and disgusting degree. This is the thing I do, but I think it's justified with Quickley. He's a good ass player, and the 3-point shooting is so game changing for how this team plays. It's awesome to see it, and I think we're seeing those little sparks of chemistry between him and Scottie Barnes and him and Immanuel and him and RJ Barrett, and just kind of the way the whole thing comes together. I'm feeling pretty good about my long-held IQ stock, Katie. What have you made of his recent run, and what are you looking forward to down the stretch from him as he now very closely gets close to approaching the 20-game mark played for the season?
Yeah, I think I'm with you in terms of consistency. That is what I want to see most for him. I think the good things will follow. We've seen it in little bursts here and there, but he really is someone who needs to get in a rhythm. And when a player plays like that and doesn't have the ability to do that, you don't really get to see them at their full shine and capacity. I'm very curious to see once we've got kind of like Ingram in the mix of it all, how that looks. Like, do we still have this BBQ triangle? Are we allowed to keep them all?
BBBQ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think there's like ways to really make that work.
Mhm.
I'm looking actually a lot like forward to see more of his leadership, because I think that's something he was showing flashes of. And
Mhm.
I think it is something that Scottie Barnes is not, I don't want to say never, but it does seem like, just as a, in his kind of player personality, that's not where he wants to lead.
Sure.
I think he's fine as a co-pilot and maybe wants to lead that way.
Mhm.
So the team in a lot of ways is still sort of missing that clear leader. And I do wonder whether or not that could be somebody like Immanuel Quickley.
Mhm.
He's really level-headed. He knows how to manipulate the game in terms of like when they need a kick in the butt to speed up, when they got to slow it down. The shooting you mentioned has been wonderful to see. But just generally, I do wonder on the leadership qualities of it all. And I think with a lot more runway, that's something that he could excel at.
We talked a lot about the sort of fit between Ingram and Scottie and RJ at the 2-3-4. And I do think Quickley kind of holds the keys to
Mhm.
how well that can all fit, because the things he does well tend to amplify everyone around him, right? The 3-point shooting he brings to the table, the threat of his pull up in the way that pulls defenses apart and creates advantages for him to get downhill and, to spray out to others and kind of, get the sort of offense churning that way. Like,
Mhm.
I think Quickley is going to be the kind of guy who stirs the whole drink, and whether he's stirring it or not is basically going to decide whether Ingram, Scottie, RJ can work as a 3-man group if the Raptors, choose to go into next season with all 3 of those guys. We'll see. Very much, up in the air. I would like to see them do it because it's fun to root for RJ Barrett playing for the Toronto Raptors, and he's been very good of late. And I think just pure talent wise, yes, there's the financial, constraints and the fit and all of that stuff, but I don't know, just bring the most good players into the season and see how it all works is kind of how I'm looking at next year. And yeah, Quickley kind of very much figures into how that's all going to tie together.
Mhm.
The leadership stuff is like on the court. It does seem, like this is very anecdotal and a very small sample, but it does seem like the last few games, he is feeling a little more emboldened to kind of like direct the traffic when he's out there, right? Like he's taking command of the offense, and he's not doing it in a way where he's over dribbling. In fact, it feels like he's kind of getting off the ball quicker and kind of getting into the stuff quicker. But it does feel like he's moving the chess pieces. You see him coming up the court. Chris, go to the corner. You come over here. Hey, you're coming up the screen. Scottie, you're over here. Like I mean, again, this is the stuff that you get to do, or you kind of figure out how to do when you just get to play more basketball and get more attuned to the teammates you have. And I think it's been a pretty exciting thing to kind of see him take the offense, kind of by the wheel and guide it. And, again, hopefully that doesn't ruffle feathers with others. I think Scottie Barnes, for all the sort of assumptions that Scottie just wants the ball all the time and wants to, kind of, command the offense, I really genuinely think in his heart of hearts, Scottie Barnes is someone who just wants to play ball movement heavy basketball where everyone's kind of eating. Like you saw it even that in that game against the Suns. There were some really nice flourishes of just like great, beautiful ball movement. And Scottie's just like thrilled at the end of the possession. Like, hell yeah, guys, good movement. Let's go. And I think there might be room there for Quickley to kind of take command of things on the floor in a way that, is very much all right and sort of in line with Scottie's sensibilities. Again, we need more time with it. We've had so little time with Quickley that all of this is just kind of speculation at this point. It's such a tiny sample he's run with, but it's getting more interesting by the day here, Katie. Any last parting shots here on IQ, other player development stuff you're keeping an eye on down the stretch before we wrap up?
Not really.
Great stuff. Yeah, this is going to get us out on time. Perfect. You have an eye on the clock. Katie, thank you so much for being on the show. Really much, very much appreciated. It's always lovely to have you on. And do you have anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
Our newsletter. You said it off the
Yeah.
top, but you got to subscribe.
Always
You
be
gotta subscribe.
plugging. Yes.
You got to
So, yeah.
subscribe.
Yes, you got to subscribe. It's free. Like it's just free stuff. You like, why would you not take free stuff? It's like
And
not taking the pierogies.
Sean, you write something original every day, which I think is going, like it really deserves to be shouted out. You take a little granule of something, whether you've talked about it in the podcast or it's something you've noticed with the team, and you really expound on it. It's very good original writing, and people should read it.
Well, that's very kind of you, Katie. Yeah, please go do it. It's we wanted to keep this thing rolling and build it up and all that good stuff. And I appreciate everyone who has subscribed. If you haven't yet, what the hell are you doing? Go do it now. Stop what you're doing and do it now. Anyway, we'll be back again tomorrow talking about Raptors beating the Celtics tonight. Hopefully, that'd be lovely. Wouldn't that be swell? Just taking down the damn Celtics again. I'm sure all the tank alarmists will be mad about it, but you're never going to get me mad about beating the stupid Boston Celtics. So we'll talk about that tomorrow and maybe get some draft stuff going in by the later part of the week as well. I've been kind of enjoying this year's draft process. But maybe we'll talk about some of the guys who will be there at the Raptors who don't, in fact, hang on and are going to slide down the lottery standings a little bit. We'll talk about some of those guys in like the 6, 7, 8 range who we haven't quite hit on it yet. Probably be on Friday's show. Either way, thank you so much for rocking with us. We'll be back again tomorrow. Another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. I am on such a cold streak, Katie. It's so bad.